I'm Florian. I'm the founder and CEO of Masters of Supply Chain. We are an industry peer group for supply chain executives. I checked this morning, 648 right now in the groups, mostly North America, Europe, senior supply chain executives, CSCOs, VPs, directors, plus about 150 technology companies that are part of the group. And what we do is essentially try to figure out together how to navigate this increasingly complex world of supply chain. Geopolitical issues is one thing. Technology, AI, automation, there's so much confusion out there. Obviously, all of you guys are aware of that. And what we do is we try to convene folks together in live sessions and workshops and see how we can figure it out together, like what is working, what's not working. It used to be easy, right? You call up Accenture, McKinsey, they would install an ERP system for you, customize the heck out of that, and it's fine. And nowadays, you have to come to Manifest and work yourself through 1,500 tech companies, try to figure out which one is the one that can fit my supply chain. Good luck with that. That's quite overwhelming. So if you're interested in our group, ping me, send me a note. It's our next invitation-only session is on February 19th. You're welcome to join us. And if you are a technology company, we also have a technology insights platform where we interview tech providers. I'm especially interested in emerging tech, AI, and so forth. We interview them, we put that on the platform, and folks can be aware of what is up and coming. So ping me if you're interested in that. Now, again, my friend David Warwick asked me to run the session today, and he wanted me to talk about data, which probably is the most boring topic I can think of. I mean, come on, we could done humanoid robots or self-driving trucks. I don't know. We'll figure something out, hopefully, to make this more interesting and exciting for you guys. But we'll get started with a couple of introductions here. We'll kick it off with Johnny. Johnny, I understand you actually started as an intern at Overhaul, and now you're running the whole show. How did that happen?
I wouldn't say the whole show, but definitely the responsibilities have grown a little bit in 10 years. So yeah, I started 10 years ago, came to Austin and got connected to Barry and did a master's in computer science, wanted to move to an emerging tech scene that Austin was at the time. And yeah, started as an intern, worked closely with the product team at the time, moved into business analyst and then engineering manager and kind of worked through the technology team. So now integrations, data, the product development, everything technology touches, I work on with our team.
Fantastic. And you're Irish. I understand that the Irish run every global supply chain, right?
Yeah, we try to have at least one Irish person on stage at all times here. So I'm stepping in for Dave Warwick on this one.
Perfect. Sasha, you are a data and systems geek as well from Dell and Johnson & Johnson. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, so it's lovely to be with all of you today and a topic that's very much near and dear to my heart. As an operator for over 25 years, 20 of that with Johnson & Johnson, leading all areas of supply chain, plan, source, make, deliver, quality, left there heading up their analytics efforts across the global supply chain for consumer health and joined Dell as their Senior Vice President of Analytics and Automation. And now I have the pleasure of, having the best of all worlds. I get to work with some very incredibly large companies and helping them think about their data strategies and partnering with folks like yourself, Florian, as one of the partners on Masters of Supply Chain, and also have the pleasure of working very closely with a couple of other nonprofit organizations, the Digital Supply Chain Institute, as well as the Cyber Readiness Institute. So all things supply chain, all things data.
Fantastic, very exciting. So I was trying to figure out a way to kick us off here, not just right away talking about the problems that we all have with data. Data is messy, nothing works, all that crap everybody knows. Let's look at it the other way around. Johnny, what would happen if all the data in the world were figured out, right? Like I'm a big company, I have all of my TMSs, WMSs, ERP, I got my external partners, logistics partners, customers, all of that data is available to me. It's clean, it's in a beautiful cloud data lake. I even have access to my sales, marketing, product development. What does that enable now if I have everything available to me?
I mean, first of all, that's the goal. That's what we want to do. But I think the main thing that comes to mind is just better control, better actions, being able to make the right decisions, work in the best locations, work with the best people. I think it just brings you that visibility, gives you that control and that comfort in being able to access everything, control everything. So yeah, that's what I think it looked like.
See, to me as a Star Trek fan, I imagine I'm like the captain on the Enterprise who just needs to say, computer, develop a new product for me. Computer, ship that product to all of my customers. Computer, did it all work? How much money did I make last month? Can we get to that point?
I think we can, but I think an interesting way of thinking about it as well is if you look at the emergence of all of the natural language features and product delivery that you've seen over the last year, do you really want to come and ask questions? Would you rather be told? Would you rather be prompted and pushed and given, the right thing to do next without having to go and dive into that yourself? And that's what I think we're aiming for, is just how can we prompt, how can we support, how can we make sure that the right actions are being taken without having to go and wade through all of the data and go and have to figure it out for yourself. That's what we want to do.
Fantastic. Sasha, so what's your vision of that sci-fi future?
Well, I mean, look, I love this idea, but I think the question's a little bit of a trick question, because I think the reality is that data certainly is an enabler for everything what we're trying to accomplish. But the reality is, even if you had perfect data, real-time perfect data, it does not necessarily solve the challenge of what are the decisions I'm trying to make, who has the right to make those decisions, and how do we think about it from an organizational design perspective in terms of the value that those decisions are really returning to the business. And so I'll give you an example, right? I was working with a company who had a laundry list of literally 400 KPIs. When I walked in, they were like, look, we need to get all the data, we need to understand all of the decisions around these KPIs, et cetera. And the reality is, when we sat and we really looked at those KPIs, it actually came down to a dozen of them, 12 of them, that really mattered from the standpoint of working capital, risk to the business, and kind of just their overall service levels. And when we started from those 12 items and really thought deeply about, okay, well, what are the decisions that need to be made? What are the organizational functions that really need to be represented in these efforts? And how might we really rethink how that process will work? That's really what unlocked, right? This effort for them, and they saw significant value in 1 quarter, right? Versus what I would call is this data precision kind of paralysis that happens in terms of, well, I've got to solve everything. I've got to know everything, and I've got to have all the data, and you actually never get to any answer. So I love the idea of perfect data, but I don't think it's actually about having all the perfect data. I think it's actually about thinking deeply around what are the critical questions that you need to be answering that are going to drive competitive difference for your business.
I was going to jump in on that and say around the topic of perfect data. Yeah, I don't think perfect data exists, but I think more so than that, it's what data is available today that you're not capturing, what day-to-day business operations that you're doing in spreadsheets or third-party tools that you're not consuming or not feeding into a central repository so you can learn from it. Something we've used in the last couple of years is the term digital core, where we've gone through a pretty extensive effort internally of examining the processes and teams and how we operate today, from our intelligence function, the sales, the customer team, operations, and saying, well, how can we digitize that more so that we can centralize data and get it into a place where you can have Gen AI or some of the new emerging tools contribute to that. So I think that's a big part of it from my perspective, is what exists out there that you're not capturing today and you're not layering in on top of the rest of your work.
I think both of you were touching on something we talked about earlier, which is it's almost like that onset of Gen AI and that push that now we need to have all of that data may have actually resulted then in getting some stuff organized, getting processes maybe better organized, but it didn't necessarily enable some magic Gen AI, but it did enable us to do other other insights, better processes, other technologies we could apply. Jonathan, you were mentioning that earlier.
Yeah, and that's one of the most powerful things that we've seen from Gen AI, is just how transformational it's been from that executive level of putting focus on Gen AI. How can we get the most out of it? How can we benefit? What can we do? And then we found that as we went through that digital core process and we brought data into a central location, that the solutions actually weren't Gen AI solutions, but it was the push to explore and discover Gen AI that got us to that point of having more traditional AI and ML solutions. And for example, digitizing some of our operations where we see the response times and metrics and quality and QA have improved because we've gone through that process of bringing it closer together. And I think that that's important from a company perspective of knocking down the walls between sales and customers and technology and really working together as more of a team, which, very lucky at Overhaul, we've got the leaders we have that are so collaborative like that.
Yeah, I love that, because I think building on that, one of the things I think we've definitely seen over the last year is this concept that if you don't have the right fundamentals in place and the right governance, all the AI is going to do for you is actually create more chaos. It's really this notion of having these really strong fundamentals in place and then being able to apply AI on top of it that then drives this efficiency and this throughput of velocity that is really mind-boggling how quickly it can actually work, but it requires that underlying foundation that you're talking about.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, a lot of people also maybe don't see that, yes, there are things we can do with Gen AI today and it can help in the day-to-day, but a lot of the core work that needs to be done to really utilize it, it's still the same data problems you've had before. The quality of the data, cleaning, doing the data science, and being able to get into a place where you're, structuring it in a way that you can learn from and have the traditional ML and AI to then be able to put the Gen AI on top and, reap rewards from that.
Sasha, you just touched on governance a little bit, right? What does governance look like in today's world, where I feel like even starting with responsibilities of the folks in an organization making decisions, this all used to be IT department stuff, right? Now we pushed it to supply chain leaders who are experts in LTL and FTL and inventory management. Now they have to make decisions about systems, data, AI, right? Are they now in charge? Are they the ones that are going to manage and run the governance of all these various tools? Like what is that going to look like?
I love this question. And look, I think part of it is we've got to think back to how technology has actually driven our organizational design over the last 10 to 20 years, which is most of our organizational constructs have come about because the technology was insufficient. And so we used people as bubblegum duct tape to really get through different processes, as opposed to having technology that actually could support an ideal design way of working for an organization. So what we're now seeing is this crossroads, right, where no longer am I required to have a human being just doing the transactional activity. The computer is actually able to do that for me. But this requires us to now step back and say, all right, now I have the opportunity to really design back where I wanted to be 10 or 20 years ago in terms of thinking about that, what that flow looked like, and having the technology actually help support that flow, which doesn't mean that people forget the fundamentals of planning and source and make and deliver. You still have to have all of those fundamentals. But now you're able to really think about it truly in this value stream or a value channel perspective, which is forcing us to create what I would say almost back to old kind of workflow where, when we started, at least in my day and age, I'm old, right? We had rotation programs, right? Where you started in a company and they purposely moved you every 3 or 4 years. And then we got into this scenario of, no, you need deep expertise because the system can't do it. I think we're now back to this disciplinarian where you actually need a cohort of people that are actually traversing through all of these different functional areas, because the decisions are not just in one area anymore. They really are a combination of these different functions. So you have to have enough knowledge and know-how to understand what that flow looks like, what are the upper and the lower limits around the decisions that are going to matter for your business, and then being able to design that in. So I think we're going to continue to see the shift from transactional work to really thinking work around this decision process capability.
I feel like tech and AI is helping us have a better visibility into all of that, but then having people that understand it all and being able to then make the right decisions is probably the tough part.
I think that's right? I mean, I always say that the IT partners truly are your partners of how do you actually think about the architecture and the tools that you're putting into your landscape, but it's got to be through a lens of a business architect of how do I want to run the business, and then how is the technology going to help me really enable that. So I do think we are seeing a convergence of understanding between, I'll call it the IT and the business norms of it's no longer you own it or I own it. It's how do we actually come up with the right technical landscape and business landscape to really move the business forward.
So Johnny, we kind of know now where we want to go and the opportunities that there are to be uncovered if I have data and control. But again, you probably run into this as a technology company with potential clients then saying, well, but our data is a mess and our systems are fragmented and all over the place. We can't do that stuff, right? So how do you approach that from a technology provider perspective?
So I think from our own experience and what we've seen, we can speak to the internal reshuffle and adoption that we've done and be able to speak to some of the key points around, how we've seen the response times, how we've seen the quality, the accuracy of the data for detecting any sort of risk events that may come. So I think we've got a really good example of what we've done internally for that approach. And then it's working with our customers of just taking them through. There's going to have to be some compromise. I think it's pretty interesting where you're dealing with this top-end technology and the latest breaking, but then you still have customers who their BOLs are being scanned and faxed, and they're not able to index them or search them, and so you've got to kind of find that compromise of, well, how do we collect that passive data? Are you willing to change the process? Is there an appetite for it there so that you can see those rewards? And I think that's the goal. Day to day is just how can we continue to show the benefits of what we've done and the improvement in our platform and just work with our customers then of trying to bring through that same process to them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if I think about back to my operating roles and back to the kind of the dashboard piece, right? It wasn't so much that I needed perfect information. I needed to have enough information that would allow me to make the right business decision in like 15 minutes that I knew I wasn't going to blow up, the business operations. I wasn't going to torpedo my service levels. And I think this is the world that we're living in now, right? Which is how do I make sure I've got enough really good data that I can trust, that the recommendations that are coming out actually make sense, right? And I have enough belief that actually is going to help me make those right decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've had to do as well over the years is identify those areas where there are gaps and suggest solutions. So, for example, you can have all the data in the world, you can, feel really good about your network, but if a bad actor shows up to pick up your goods, then, once they leave, you're in trouble. So it's about inserting technology into that position and being able to explain this is a high-risk critical area and you need something in there to be able to capture that data, which is through a mobile application, tablet application that can go in and capture it and be able to verify that the person who's showing up is the legitimate person that should be there. And so I think that's just an area that's constantly evolving, especially with the sophistication of cargo theft today. It's that continuous feedback loop with our customers and with people in the network of, well, what can we do to stay ahead of the game and keep out in front of that arms race?
Sasha, you just touched on trust, right? I mean, in pretty much every one of our roundtables last year, I feel like the skepticism about AI applications is founded in data, right? Garbage in, garbage out. How do we build that trust? Because we do see the opportunity in wanting to take advantage of some of these really cool tech and AI applications. But on the flip side, if I turn on a switch and I have my AI tool give me suggestions of what to do and half of it is wrong, I mean, that could be millions of dollars wasted.
Yeah, and so I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first part around the trust piece, which is around the data. And I think this is where it's the crawl, walk, run, which is, do you really understand what decision you're trying to make? Does your organization really have really well-defined guardrails around that decision? And then from the standpoint of who is actually monitoring what is happening? Do they actually have the right training and understanding of what's happening? The intention of these tools are not just to let them just go run wild without any human involvement. There is still some sort of a human touch point that happens. It's just how frequently and how expansively is it in fact happening. So I think that's on the trust piece, right? How are you thinking about that build out and that governance piece? I think the other piece is an acknowledgement, unfortunately and fortunately, that these tools actually allow you to make decisions at such velocity that the physical supply chain can't actually keep up with some of these tools any longer. So I'll give you a real scenario working with one of our clients where they actually had their AI solution that was releasing inventory so fast that it actually just gobbed up the entire warehouse, right? It's not that it was the wrong decision. It was that the decision that was being made was so fast that the human and the physical world couldn't keep up with it. So now you're having to slow down the AI agent instead of actually, making it go faster. And I think these are some of the learnings that we're going to see over this time horizon is as people start playing with this synchronization that's going to have to happen between the physical world and the digital world has to be in sync. And I think that's some of the things that we're starting to see.
Yeah, and I think that is a real key point, is the human in the loop as part of that process, and ensuring that how do you balance the trade-off of, is it overwhelming, is it too much for a person to be involved in or to get feedback. And so it's important to place that feedback in the right area, so that you can continue to improve and learn and make those models better over time. So everybody wants to talk about agentic AI and humanless and all the rest, but it's still a critical component to it, and the value you get from that real life feedback is really what drives it and makes it powerful.
Sasha, you just mentioned, I'm actually directing the question to him, but I'm picking up on the point you just made, which is the digital and the physical supply chain. And so one of the things I noticed in a lot of our roundtables and conversations is a realization that I do not have a perfect digital representation of my physical supply chain at the moment. I don't think anybody really has that. However, if I can get to that point, if I can at least map where I have the gaps and then plug in some IoT sensors, plug in some computer vision to then fill the gaps, right? To actually know how fast or slow the folks are working in my warehouse with that inventory gives feedback back to that AI agent and slows himself down, right? So the question to you is, as the tech geek here on the panel, and hardware and sensors, is that something that comes up in your conversations as well, where it's like, how there is technology, there's physical technology, there's sensors we need to deploy to fill some of these gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we've worked with some of our partners and customers on, as well as what telemetry exists there, what's out in the network that we can pick up and aggregate and bring in and start to learn from. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're always looking at, I think, is how to understand and read and really make intelligence from just raw IoT data in whatever form it comes. That's really, the goal is to continue to expand that network, to expand the coverage, and be able to help day-to-day operations improve.
Sasha, you work with some of the biggest supply chain organizations in the world, and tech is moving so fast, the capabilities are moving so fast. How do they stay up to date and know what is actually possible? And what I mean by that is some of the things I keep in mind always is, yes, we don't want to lead a project with chasing the shiny object of AI. We want to lead with a business case. But if I don't know what technology is capable of doing, I'm not going to be thinking about the right business case. So how do you solve that conundrum?
Yeah, so I would say the folks that I see are leading in this space are doing two things fundamentally. One is they are, I'll say, innovating with purpose. They have a team that is constantly looking at emerging technology, and they are playing. And they're playing on real business problems that they have. They're not just playing in pure white space, but to understand how the technology potentially could help them accelerate. That's the first thing. The second place, and it goes back to the organizational construct I was talking about earlier, they are spending a significant amount of time and energy to really go back to the fundamentals of the governance processes. Who's in charge? What's the decision? Who's accountable for those decisions? And making sure that those are really right. And so the organizations that I see that are doing those two things are far outpacing, I would say, organizations that are saying, let's apply AI holistically everywhere, right? They're doing innovation with purpose, and they're really spending the time around the structural norms around these decisions. And they know that the AI and some of these technologies are going to help them solve those problems over time, but they're doing those two things with intention.
It reminds me, please, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just think that's really the key point. When there was this drive and GPT 3.5 came out and everybody everywhere wanted to do the latest and greatest with it, we sat down and we went through the kinds of business problems that we wanted to solve and what would the outcome look like if we, successfully executed on building out. And we found that the problems were mostly solved by non-Gen AI. It was just really sitting down, having that conversation and that drive and impetus that was put there by the emergence of Gen AI that helped us realize that, hey, we got all these things that we can go do to improve operations, to help our customers, and we can solve them all without Gen AI. But it was that got us thinking about it.
One quick add-on to this, our friend David Warwick always says, like, with technology, you can do old processes in old ways, maybe faster, or maybe it wakes you up to actually rethink your entire operation and do it in a new way completely. Is that something you see in the companies you work with?
Absolutely. And I think this is the difference of companies really understanding the differentiation between transformational capability, which is this white space, like how am I going to actually really do this, versus really kind of incremental improvement. And they're very purposeful that they need to be doing both, but they don't mix the two. And I think that's one of the places where we sometimes get ourselves caught around the axle, that we think we're doing transformation, and in fact, no, you're not. Or we think we're doing, the other one, and no, you're not. So I think it's about being really clear about the differentiation and the fact that you do need both. You really do need both.
We're coming up to the end. I do have one quick tech question for you, because that also comes up a lot in our conversations. Are there AI tools right now that can actually help me clean up my data? Because that is something that keeps popping up. Everybody starts with this, and it's like, is there, like, I have 15 different versions of an ERP system, right? Like, is there an AI tool that can now make sense of the different SKU names across all these different tools?
No specific tool comes to mind, but what I would say is that from a security perspective, we would look to do that ourselves. So that's what we use Gen AI for, so that we can keep it inside of our infrastructure and not expose any sensitive information elsewhere. So I think for that kind of task, I think that would be something that you'd want to use your own internal tools and team to do, just from a security, data integrity perspective.
Perfect. All right, let's wrap this up. Sasha, with you first. What is your number one piece of advice for 2026 that leaders should pay attention to, should execute? What's in this space here? What comes to mind?
So for me, I think honestly, one of the biggest risks that are out there that we are underestimating is the cyber footprint that's out there. And especially as we think about data and AI, et cetera, which is the fact that it's not going away. And how are we embracing it? How are we thinking about it? How are we embedding this into all of the efforts that we're working on? So that would be the number one item I would say needs to be on people's radars if it's not.
Yeah, I would absolutely say cyber, but if I was just going to give maybe a different answer, I'd go back to, the advice of having your leadership teams in your departments work together more closely. I think especially for a technology company like ourselves, it's important that technology is the foundation of what you're doing across the board. So I just think really pushing on that collaboration, breaking down those walls between departments and working together. We've seen, transformational outcomes from that, from getting more collaborative and working more closely. So that would be advice I'd give, is to continue to push that from your departments and leads.
Perfect, fantastic. By the way, on February 19th, we will continue this conversation on data readiness for AI in our roundtables. I could not have planned this any better. Thank you so much, Sasha, Jonathan, and we'll keep going with the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.